Good afternoon, everybody. I'll be talking about how to get the best out of the paper. So basically, how to read the paper. There are so many journals and so many articles coming left, right, and center, and everything published, even in a good journal, need not necessarily mean is correct. So we must know that how, whether it is whatever is author has written is appropriate, correct, or not. So this is how the topic is all about. Before I start, this was editorial in BMJ in 1994, and I think it still holds true to certain extent. Some of the published, in bracket perhaps most, of the published article belongs in the bin and certainly should not be used to inform the practice. So, which articles to read, to what extent, and to use in day-to-day practice, that's a question, and that we will try to answer. Most of the things has been covered for last 1.5 days. I'm just going to put everything together. Unfortunately, in 30 minutes, we cannot discuss the same thing again, so we will skip. But I'll just put together that what you have to see when you read the article. Most importantly, only abstract is not the solution. Discussion is definitely not the solution, because discussion is author's interpretation of the results. We don't want to go in author's interpretation. We want to see ourselves that what are the results and how we interpret in our day-to-day practice. So reading only discussion and abstract is not the solution. So many things about evidence-based medicine. So many questions. We do not have evidence. We still practice that. There are so many questions unresolved. Bottom line is that it is not about the presence or absence of disease. It is about following up and treating them in a appropriate way. There are lots of things, evidence-based diagnosis, evidence-based medicine. Basically, bottom line is that evidence, there are lots of multiple issues, but patient's input, as Dr. Sudeep was talking about, is important. You cannot have patient's thought process not involved and talk about evidence. So basically, once we decide the article, we have an abstract, we have introduction, we have methodology, we have results, and we have discussion. And if you say what is abstract, is basically a brief outline of your article. Introduction is usually a review of literature. Methodology, yes, that is the proper evidence-based, all your research methodology. Results are the analysis. You have to see what is revealed, what is concealed. Because if I want to highlight something, as an author I may be biased as a researcher, and I will highlight only the positive things. But my data may have something which is concealed, which you can see from the data, which I have not highlighted. So you have to see the results, and discussion is all about hypothesis or no masala. The results you can interpret totally in different way for what authors have interpreted. So discussion is least important. I'm not saying it's not important. Of course, you see what is his hypothesis or her hypothesis, and use that in your practice. Now when I start, the study design is more important than hypothesis. I'm not saying that hypothesis is not important. Why I'm saying design is important, that you can have a valid question, use inappropriate study design, get inappropriate results, and the whole study is waste. So the design is very important. So as Dr. JP was talking about, Professor Mulyal, that study design has to be done appropriately. Your question has to be very valid. The design has to be appropriate for your study design. So when you do appraisal of the article, this is from the Studying a Study and Testing a textbook. I would recommend that you should have a copy and read it along with the second. There are 2 books for evidence-based medicine. Methods, assignment, assessment, results, interpretation, and extrapolation. There are 6 points. And mnemonics will come MARIE, M-A-A-R-I-E. And we'll go step by step. When you see the article, you have to see what is the objective. Whether the objective hypothesis is clearly stated or not stated. The study type, whether it is appropriate for the question asked. The population, whether it's properly obtained, whether it's clearly mentioned in the article how the study population was defined, and the controls were matched if there is a RCT, if there is a case control study design. Sample size, everything yesterday has been taken, but the number sample size is adequate. Factors determine the sample size has been appropriately mentioned, has taken care of. Then let's go to the objective of the study. How the objective is mentioned. The objective has to be very clearly stated. Now, if I write down only the examining the role of bed rest in the back pain is a very broad, inappropriate. If I write down the objective, that effect of 1 week bed rest compared with the normal activity on the severity and duration of lumbosacral pain, then my aim is very clearly stated that what I am looking for. So that you have to see that author has to write down the objective very clearly in the article. If it is very vaguely written, then the results what you get also are very vague. Null hypothesis, as everything has been, as I said, covered. So basically there is a hypothesis, and when for statistical testing we do a null hypothesis where we say that let us assume that there is no difference, and Professor Mulial has explained everything in great detail, and I cannot repeat that because as I said that I am a student and his knowledge is very different. The way he is teaching is very different and perfect. So whatever he is explained in morning, that why null hypothesis and what rational, you must understand that why we choose that there is no difference, because it's easier to reject the null hypothesis. But that is very important. So then we have lots of different study design. For each case, we have to take the proper study design. We want to look the prevalence, then we do cross-sectional study. If you want to look for the risk factor, of course there is a case control and cohort study. For the rare disease, please do not think of cohort study. It always has to be a case control study design. And if you want to look for the intervention, then it has to be a interventional study. The randomized control trial, of course, is a perfect design where you can also look for the treatment versus A versus B or treatment versus placebo, whatever way, but there has to be a 2 proper arm, everything defined. Then when he was talking about causality, he mentioned everything. So basically, there are 3 factors when it comes look for the causality: association, temporal relation, and altering the cause. Alert the changes the effect. These 3 again he has mentioned very in great detail in causality part, so we'll skip. But when author is talking about the cause and effect relationship, whether these 3 criteria he has mentioned and fulfilled, that you have to see in the article. Sample size again has been discussed in great detail, and I'm sure by 2x2 table he must have explained type 1 and type 2 error. You must know about this and whether author has taken appropriate sample size using this type 1 and type 2 error. The assignment. How were the cases assigned in the group? Whether the confounding factors were, what are the confounding variable? Is there any chance whether it's been taken care of? That we have to see. If there is a RCT in which way the patients were randomized, concealment is a very important risk factor. I can do a perfect study, but if the allocation concealment is not done properly, the whole study purpose of RCT is gone into waste. And I'll give one example for the masking, that if the same study what Professor Mulial was talking about, internal memory artery ligation, we do everything as what he described, but the cover of the masking, if we kept transparent, where surgeon can see what is for the individual patient, and if I'm a biased as a surgeon and write down, if I think that intermemory ligation always helps, if the cover is transparent, I can see A, B, then I can choose, and those things have happened in the past. So how the masking was done, how the blinding was done is important. Masking is very important thing. The blinding is multiple blinding. There is a single blinding, double blinding, triple blinding. Single blinding is where only patient doesn't know which therapy is given, or the surgeon does. Double blinding is even like for the medical trial, double blinding is possible. That as a investigator, I may not know that whether patient is on therapy or placebo. That was done in Oates study. EMGT, early manifest glaucoma trial, did not follow, so it was a single blind study. Double blind is more appropriate for lots of studies. Then the triple blind is where the person who is analyzing the data also does not know that which group was which group. So in a sense, the group A was whether a therapeutic or group B was therapeutic and B was a placebo group. So there is triple blinding and there are multiple blinding. We cannot go into more detail, but blinding is important. So masking was one issue, blinding was separate issue. From there we go to the assessment. How the outcome measures were assessed, whether they were appropriate, accurate, precise, masked, complete, unaffected by the process. For example, appropriate outcome means that if I have done trabeculectomy for the glaucoma patients, what should be the appropriate outcome? If you read the literature, most of the studies, unfortunately, most of the studies will talk about intraocular pressure control. Does it appropriate outcome? In certain way, yes, because we want to reduce the intraocular pressure. But what is the idea of doing surgery in the long term? Prevent a blindness, so prevent a visual field progression. So what would be the ideal outcome? The intraocular pressure control or visual field stability? Visual field stability is a more appropriate outcome than intraocular pressure measurement. Intraocular pressure when we always measure, but visual field, and if you look the literature, majority of the studies will talk about 90% success, 95% success, 85% success for intraocular pressure control. They will not talk about the visual field progression. But if you do a proper study design, early manifest glaucoma treatment study, collaborative initial glaucoma treatment study, they will talk about IOP. But then more important, the importance and they would have given to the visual field stability. So a good study will have a more appropriate outcome, and that is up to you to decide. Article may be published in lots of different journal, good journal, average journal, but you have to see whether author has taken appropriate outcome for that disease or that question is looking for. There are lots of things about the accuracy, instrument error, investigator bias, intra-observer variability, quality control, random checking, everything for RCT random checking, whether everything has been mentioned and taken care for. Then results. Now basically there are three issues. One is estimation, so measure the size of difference between the two groups, the strength of association between the variables. The second is inference, that is statistical significant testing of hypothesis and draw conclusion. And third is adjustment, that is remove the effect of confounding variable. There are three issues and majority of issues again by Professor Mullier is covered, so I am not going in detail. But one thing you must remember, measure the size of difference between the group. The strength of association does not mean causality, it's just the one factor. There were other factors which he already discussed in the morning that we have to keep in mind. So relation between two or more characteristics of measurement, that is one issue. A risk factor with a disease more frequently than expected by chance alone, that is what you want to look for in association. It does not mean there is a causality. There are other factors that we have to look. So if the author only by association has mentioned causality, then he is wrong. For example, I am just debating a little bit, but people talk about Pearce correlation value and they start talking about there is a cause and effect relationship. But correlation means they are two correlated. That doesn't mean that there is a cause and effect relationship. And there are lots of articles, they would mention correlation value and will start talk about the cause and effect relationship. That is wrong. Relative risk, again he has described in great detail, so let's skip it. But what he used to teach us, that if the value is more than 2, then it is of importance for majority of the disease. And I'll just give one example. What is the intraocular pressure? I'm not saying more than 1 is usually has significant value, but more than 2, that is what he said it interests him. Let's talk about IOP. What is the relative risk of IOP for glaucoma progression? If you look most of the article, most of the RCT. it usually varies from 1.1 to 1.3. So, when we talk about intraocular pressure, only intraocular pressure, then we are in trouble. That's why when we talk about glaucoma, we say it's a multifactorial disease, and some of the factor we cannot control, and that's why we give importance to IOP. IOP reduction does help, but it never reduces the rate of progression close to zero, and because of that, because relative risk of IOP is very minimal. Odds ratio, again, he has discussed everything, so we skip. Statistical significant testing, again, I think yesterday I was not there, but sir, you have covered. So basically, the statistical testing is to determine whether the results we have got are so unusual that association does not actually exist. So that is p-value. The more better way of looking at confidence interval, and whether the authors have mentioned all these things in the paper or not. Alpha error, beta error, level of significance, hypothesis, significant test used. One more thing you have to remember, based on the data, there are various statistical tests has to be done. Still I have published so many papers, but I still make an error in choosing the appropriate test. So studying a study and testing a test, there is a table which says that which test to use. So if you are in doubt, go and see that whether authors have used correct test or not. If the test is whatever author have used is not correct based on his data, then the results become little dicey. Confidence interval, nowadays journal insists you look the confidence interval range in terms of a test or results which are not significant. In those situations, you may want to look the upper level of on the higher side of confidence interval and look the clinical significance. But in general, the confidence interval and p-value usually would tell you similar thing, but confidence interval is more stronger, and you can build around most of the measures. There are various way confidence interval you can build. We can discuss some other time about the confidence interval and adjustment. What he was talking about, adjusting the various confounding. There is a way of doing it in a statistics. Whether authors have done these adjustment for the various groups and various gender, age, level of smoking. Based on your disease you are looking, you may make adjustment. So, and whether it is done or not, that you have to see. So these all things has been done. Then this is where I was yesterday. I talked that I will give. So this was the paper Professor Mulel is to give us, and see that analyze what the authors have done. This is from the John Hopkins Institute, done by Alfred Sommer. The role of vitamin A deficiency in mortality. And this data also had malnourished and well-nourished, and the relative risk of vitamin A deficiency on mortality was 1.4 across all the age group. Anything else information this paper provides which author failed to mention, and more strong data. Much more stronger data than vitamin A deficiency. Now just look the table, don't look horizontally. Now start looking vertically, horizontally. Not look malnourished, well-nourished. What is the difference? Across the group, whether they are vitamin A deficiency or no deficiency. 4.6 versus 1.3. 6.6 versus 1.8. So, a nourishment and relative risk, mortality. Malnourished and mortality risk is 3.5. In older age group, 15. So what is more important? The whole article was talking about vitamin A supplement. Does vitamin A supplement will reduce the mortality or nourishment? So as I was talking about, the authors get biased. So if I have a pre-nourished that vitamin A deficiency, even if data so obviously telling us on face, feed properly, the mortality will reduce drastically, I will not realize that. So as a reader, I should be unbiased and see the data. The second paper, this was again from Archives of Ophthalmology. We talk about diode laser photocoagulation as a primary surgical treatment and says that it is far from serious complication, is rapid, easy to learn primary surgical procedure. Primary. Let's see the data. This graph, this is IOP pre-treatment, post-treatment. Basically, if the value is all around, then effect of treatment is plus minus. Now, if you see the result, success rate is how much? 48%. Is it good enough? What is the success of trabeculectomy? The existing gold standard procedure is, the 5-year success is approximately 70 to 85%. So does it good enough to the gold standard? No. Now let's do the other data. IOP increased from the baseline in 33%. IOP actually increased from the baseline. 1 out of 19. So 5% patient vision was 20/60 preoperatively reduced by at least 2 lines. This all data is available in the results section. Still, Archives of Ophthalmology published when the authors concluded that this is a better primary procedure. Safe. Is it safe? If 1 in 20 people the visual acuity decreases, 33% IOP increases, we know that IOP is actually a risk factor for glaucoma progression. The success of surgery is not as good as gold standard, then how can you say it's safe and is effective? So there was major flow in somewhere. It is not author's fault only. I may be biased for various reasons, but as a reviewer, editor also failed. Now as a reader, we should not fail. And that's why cyclophotocoagulation still not become the primary procedure for glaucoma patients, despite publishing in Archives of Ophthalmology.
I have a question. Now, like if somebody nowadays, even patients read these things.
Now, patient reads, I know that's a big issue.
It's a big issue. I am saying because we have to read more than them. That's what I'm trying to say. And then in these sort of things, like how do we counter this?
No, I explained. It happens because Google, now with the Google and internet, things have become so simple. They can just go and read everything. And unfortunately, there are so many websites, at least in glaucoma, I know that they provide wrong information. So as a clinician, it's our job basically to explain them about the disease. I usually do that. I give them the website, which I know that provides proper information. So I tell them to go and read from this website, because I know that they are authenticated, at least I have read them. After that is patients, because sometimes patient does not believe us. So that we can't do anything. But
I mean, in this context, what I'm saying is how important is to interpret correctly so that
very
you can
important.
counter the patient. But he'll bring with the internet. So this
they
is what
have all sort of printout and everything from the...
Yeah.
The one more issue is about is...
JP, you may be old timer, but old timers bring printout. They ask me how many milligrams you will give injection.
There is a website which talk about so negative about glaucoma management. And my one patient, I actually read it after when my patient brought the printout, where everything was written was, I would not say 100% wrong, but only one side of the coin. So all the 20 page, every medication side effect were listed and exaggerated. So, and with, of course, with the, some of where with the quotation, publication quoted. So like there is a one case report that patient died after topical beta blocker. So because patient was non-asthmatic and patient died. So that's why we ask history, but that doesn't mean that beta blockers are bad for every patient. So if the patient does not have any systemic history of respiratory disease and patient cannot afford any medication, beta blocker is still first of choice of drug for glaucoma, and for so many other diseases. So that doesn't mean that one death we have to stop using beta blocker. But if the patient has read only that, then there's the various issue, the causation anyway has been covered. The other is statistical significance versus clinical significance. And of course, causation, everything Professor Mulyal has covered. The other thing about especially if there is a new medication, harms it can cause. So because what happens that RCT numbers would be small, sometimes the rare side effects can get unnoticed. Sometimes the side effect, because numbers are so small, it may not reach the statistical significance. Does it mean that side effects are less or not important? And that's what happens in most of the journals. There, the clinical significance and the way you evaluate it's important. So suppose there is a medication which does not cause any side effect. Let's say prostaglandin, and one of the side effect is superficial punctate keratitis for the prostaglandin. Let's say the one drug causes only 1%, the next drug causes 7%. But because of the small number of side effects, the statistical significance test would invariably come negative. Does it mean that new drug does not cause more side effects? On those situations, you have to have a clinical significance and see whether clinically does it make sense or not. So out of your every 6th or 7th patient, if he is going to give one extra side effect for the same IOP reduction, then definitely not worth it. For 1 millimeter more IOP reduction, I would still say not worth it. For 10% less blindness, maybe. So that, the way you have to evaluate the clinical significance, that what is the end point, what you are looking. For glaucoma, it's very easy for me to say IOP control blindness. For systemic disease, you have to look at side effect versus mortality and morbidity. So whether it's worth it or not, the extra side effects, extra harm you give to the patient by new medication, whether it's worth it, the amount of benefit it gives, the authors will not write it for you. You have to see the side effects and evaluate by a clinical significant test. There is number needed to harm, there is number needed to treat, to see these two issues. Covered. Then the last issue is extrapolation. So to individual is relative risk, absolute risk, number needed to treat. To group is relative risk reduction, and to community is population attributable risk percentage. Some of the things we have published using this thing in glaucoma. For more detail, Professor Mulyal will be able to tell you and teach you everything, because per percentage I have learned from him only, everything. But these are the things you have to see. That for individual practice, what is NNT? And I'll just give one example. The OATS study, how many are from glaucoma? Ophthalmology? How many have read OATS study? Ocular hypertension treatment study? What is the conclusion? The conclusion of first paper states that treatment in OATS reduced the risk of glaucoma by 54%. This thing was, one line was magnified by industry, left, right and center for their benefit, saying that glaucoma risk reduces to 50%, half. Now let's see what is the actual part. Over a 5 year, how many people develop glaucoma? Without treatment, 10%. With treatment, 5%. So if you treat, how much reduction is? 10 minus 5. If you don't treat also, 90% is not going to get. If you treat, actual benefit is 10 minus 5 is only 5%. If you convert these, absolute rate reduction, then you get NNT. So basically, every 20 patients ocular hypertension as defined in OATS, if you treat over a period of 5 years, one patient will not progress into glaucoma. We are not talking about blindness. Okay? So that much amount of cost involved, side effect involved to prevent only one progression to glaucoma. Whether it's worth it is an individual question. There are lots of other factors. In most of the patient, I would say that it is not worth it. Then what you do that Oates did, there is a subgroup. So subgroup analysis has limitation, but you do a subgroup. If you have a high risk, that means pressure more than 26, cup disc ratio more than 0.5, normal corneal thickness, so less than 550 micron, now the NNT becomes 4. Worth it. So that is where you look the paper. The EMGT was very simple. Ocular hypertension treatment, NNT was 4. That means treating open angle glaucoma with definite disc damage is helpful because the benefit you are getting is more. Again, here also you can do high risk group analysis and get NNT of 2 also. Case report, case series are important, but only to formulate hypotheses, or please do not have cause and effect relationship for case papers. Last slide. The AGs, how many are aware of AG study? Advanced Glaucoma Intervention Study. The graph actually shows that if the patients have stable pressure, less than 18 all the visit, their progression is much less than pressure fluctuates to 18. Now what was the AG score? AG score 0 to 20. AG is defined progression as more than 3 points. The glaucoma progression was based on if there is a score increased by at least more than 3. The graph shows only value 4. Okay. The progression has to be at least close to 4. So how many actually progressed? This is the graph. When you extrapolate, make it proper, you realize, of course, patient progresses. The fluctuation is important. I am not saying it's not important. But authors have magnified that progression by truncating the y-axis. If they have been truthful and shown this graph, the whole importance of IOP reduction that time in 90s and early 2000, late 90s, early 2000 would not have come. That IOP reduction is so good because you see the progression rate, very minimal. The other graph also tells the same thing. This was individual, all the time, individual visits, intra-visit. Once you truncate the graph to actual value, importance of IOP fluctuation, IOP control goes down. So IOP control is important, but the authors can magnify the value by changing the graph. So that we have to see that what is actually importance. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajul. So, any questions to Rajul? Yeah, sure. Microphone, front row.
See, the thing is,
You
get a lot of these patients with high intraocular pressure. Okay? In the court of law, if you don't treat them at all, it is very difficult to prove to a judge you are correct in not treating. I also have treated so many patients with ocular hypertension, pressure is around 24, disc is perfectly normal, angle is open, patient doesn't have hypertension, doesn't have diabetes, but I have put them on drops. In spite of my conscience telling me this is incorrect to put them on drops. The reason is very simple, because the industry is forcing you to give the drops to the patient. If it goes to the court of law, I am 100% sure you will lose the case of not treating. So there is a significant alteration has to be made in the attitude not only of the doctors, the patients and the industry. Now why would the industry cut its leg by saying it's useless?
Of course industry will not cut it.
It will not.
It will not cut it.
So there is always a problem.
So, but
honestly, I have treated hundreds of
I understand,
myself.
but see, at least in India, we are not in that bad situation.
Correct.
Even in USA, they are not in that bad situation. Yes. They can monitor the patient with high pressure. At least in our country, where we have liberty to observe, what I am not saying that we should not treat or treat. What I am saying that whatever written in manuscript, whether it's published in IJO, AJO, archives, IOVS, whatever, don't take on face value.
Yes.
Read the article, interpret for yourself. Now, interpretation and reading comes when you know what to read and what to interpret. So I wanted to outline that these are the issues we have to look. It's very the individual factors we have taken. Now to put all together and analyze individual paper is very difficult.
Correct.
But that is what we are supposed to do. We don't have to do all the articles, but at least the important articles which can really change the day-to-day practice, those articles we must. So I am not saying that somebody has published OCT in glaucoma, we have to critically analyze. Of course, it's important. But somebody has published saying that treatment B is much better than treatment A. That has to be seen properly and see whether it makes sense or not.
Correct. So clinical decision is as important as understanding research decision and applying it clinically.
Yeah, this was totally different. This was not about research methodology. This was about how to use in day-to-day the articles in our practice. What are the parameters? So both are very similar thing. See, if you do a proper research, then just change it on other way around. That is a good article to use in day-to-day practice. Yes. There's nothing different. It's just that looking from the different side.
Correct.
Sir, just a little comment on what Dr. Sanathan just said was, normally the example that I would give to my patient, I think your transparency to the patient and communication to the patient, if it is very, very good, patient is able to understand why you are not starting the treatment. The simple example I give them that there is an ant and I can kill it with a nuclear bomb as well. But I might as well reserve the bomb for something more sinister later on. So when you can actually just crush the ant with the tip of your finger, why do you want to go ahead and take treatment for something that we can wait and watch and keep the reserves when we really need to? So I think that communication basis is something that is much beyond the court of law, things where patient is able to understand why that particular treatment is meted out to him, irrespective whether he's gone through the literature bit or not.
There's so many issues in because
I think Malcolm Gladwell's book only. I think The Outliers. I think it's Malcolm. He's mentioned one of them is like experience of anybody, any specialty will be 10,000 hours, and the other one he says is if you spend the study in US, if you spend 15 minutes, you have the maximum number of lawsuits in US, and if you spend 3 more minutes to the patient, and the last question is the doctor asks us, do you have any more questions? No more questions. So lawsuit drops down. So I think the lawsuit is one thing, and as he said, the personal rapport. But again, are we doing EBM, evidence-based medicine? And I think that's the reason, even to read the evidence, we need some knowledge. That's why I think what the mind does not know, eyes do not see. So I think even if the patient reads something as published in archives, he will say archives is having impact factor so much. I mean, I'm surprised some of the patients ask me this question. I said, how the hell he knows about, I don't know how many how many doctors know about impact factor. I'm going to talk a few things on it. But what I'm saying, I think how the patient will be convinced with evidence also is an art. But not all patients know so much. But some come with this.
See, you will have so many patients, whatever you explain, the last thing they will tell, doctor, what you are going to do. Then what you will do?
That's why.
That's what. But when you ask the patients, see, there are surgeries where you are not very sure how much benefit you will get. Very advanced glaucoma. You explain the risk benefit. But at the end, what patient will tell, doctor, I raise the case on your hand. What you will do? Make a decision. So there are things where I would not like to take decision for patient.
No, Raju, but I always tell this, you are hungry for vision, you take the decision of eating. That means the surgeon can only give the food, but he has to eat it and decide. So I always tell, even the son or daughter cannot decide for the patient, however old he is, except the the pediatric age group. So I think this is what I mean. Patient satisfaction skill is an art which is not being taught in medical colleges, which Dr. Lahane spoke yesterday. Finally, I think patient is important. And as you said, the decision has to be by the patient. And all we can give the evidence-based medicine. The relatives can give the confidence. The decision is finally patient's. Because even when to do a cataract surgery is a big problem. The patient with 6'6" will say, I have glare. And the patient with 6'18" will say, I'm okay. So how can you prove who's wrong? But I think that's where the doctor-patient relationship. I think we had a wonderful talk. And I hope Raju will be here sometime. No, you're leaving. How can you go? Dr. JP is talking. Anyhow, thank you, Rajul. Rajul, before you go, I just want you to have a word with Santan and the clap is for you, Rajul.